Weston Cole's heart thundered as the sleek black sedan pulled up to his penthouse at dusk, the New York skyline blazing like a promise of something extraordinary. He'd spent the evening dodging paparazzi and fake smiles at a charity gala, but now, alone in the back seat, his thoughts were consumed by the man behind the wheel. Elliot, his 20-year-old driver, whose quiet intensity had unraveled him in ways he couldn't explain. As Elliot opened the car door, their eyes locked for a fleeting second, and Weston felt the air crackle with a truth he wasn't ready to face. Stepping into the cool October night, Weston adjusted his blazer, his polished exterior hiding the storm within. At 26, he was the youngest tech mogul to grace Forbes' cover, a man who built an empire from code and ambition. Yet here he was, undone by a driver who barely spoke. Elliot, with his sharp jawline and warm brown eyes, had been driving him for 3 months, and every ride felt like a dance on the edge of something dangerous, something forbidden. Weston's life was a fortress of control, board meetings, investor calls, and a carefully curated public image, but Elliot was a crack in the foundation, threatening to bring it all down. Inside the penthouse, Weston poured himself a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the city lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stood at the edge of his world, 60 stories above Manhattan, and tried to shake the image of Elliot's hands gripping the steering wheel, the way his black turtleneck hugged his lean frame. Get a grip, Wes, he thought, but his pulse betrayed him. The world knew him as the untouchable CEO of Cole Tech, a man who dated women to keep the tabloids happy, but the truth was a secret he'd buried deep. Weston was gay, and he'd spent years running from it. The buzzer sounded, sharp and unexpected, jolting him from his thoughts. He glanced at the security screen. Elliot's face stared back, his expression unreadable but urgent. Weston's breath caught. Why is he back? He buzzed him in, his mind racing. Had he forgotten something in the car? A jacket, a phone? Or was this something else entirely? The elevator hummed, and when the door slid open, Elliot stood there, his chestnut hair slightly mussed, his eyes burning with something Weston couldn't name. Mr. Cole, Elliot said, his voice low, steady, but laced with an edge that made Weston's skin prickle. I need to talk to you. He stepped into the penthouse, uninvited, and the air shifted, heavy with unspoken words. Weston's grip tightened on his glass, the bourbon untouched. What's this about, Elliot? He asked, forcing calm into his voice, though his heart was a runaway train. Elliot hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting Weston's again. I saw you tonight, he said, his words deliberate, like he was choosing each one with care. At the gala, the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching. Weston's stomach dropped. He'd been careful, so careful, but Elliot's words sliced through his defenses. I don't know what you're talking about, Weston lied, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Don't do that, Elliot said, stepping closer, close enough that Weston could smell the faint cedar of his cologne. Don't pretend you don't feel it too. The room spun, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. Weston wanted to push him away, to retreat to the safety of his lies, but Elliot's presence was a gravitational pull, undeniable and all-consuming. Elliot, you don't understand, Weston whispered, his voice raw. It can't happen. You don't know what's at stake. Elliot's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened, a mix of defiance and tenderness. I know more than you think, he said. I know what it's like to hide who you are, to live for everyone else's expectations. I've been doing it my whole life. The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded, and Weston felt something inside him crack open. Elliot wasn't just a driver. He was a mirror, reflecting the parts of Weston he'd spent years trying to erase. Weston turned away, staring out at the city that worshipped and judged him in equal measure. You don't get it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not like you. I can't just be who I am. The world is watching, Elliot. My investors, my board, the media, they'll tear me apart. Elliot stepped closer, his presence a quiet strength. And what about you? He asked. What happens to you if you keep hiding? The question hit like a punch, and Weston's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. He turned to face Elliot, their faces inches apart, and for the first time in years, he let himself feel the weight of his own truth. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice trembling. Elliot reached out, his hand brushing Weston's arm, a touch so gentle it felt like a lifeline. "You don't have to do it alone," Elliot said, and in that moment, Weston knew there was no going back. The city hummed below, oblivious to the seismic shift unfolding in Weston's penthouse. His heart pounded as Elliot's hand lingered on his arm, the warmth of the touch anchoring him to a moment he'd spent years avoiding. He wanted to pull away, to retreat to the safety of his carefully curated life, but Elliot's eyes, steady, searching, and impossibly kind, held him in place. "I've seen you, Weston," Elliot said, his voice soft but unwavering. "Not the CEO, not the magazine covers, the real you. The way you pause before you answer a question, like you're choosing your words to hide something. The way you look at me when you think I don't notice." Weston's throat tightened. He'd spent so long perfecting his mask, convincing himself it was armor, but Elliot saw through it like it was glass. "You don't know what you're asking," Weston said, stepping back, the bourbon glass trembling in his hand. "This isn't just about me. My company, my employees, thousands of people depend on me. If I come out, if I let this," he gestured between them, the air thick with possibility, "happen, it's not just my life that implodes. The media will eat me alive. My board will lose faith. Everything I've built could collapse." Elliot's expression didn't waver. "And what's the cost of staying silent?" he asked. "You're living half a life, Weston. I know, because I've done it too." He took a breath, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My dad was a pastor, my mom taught Sunday school. When I realized I was gay, I thought it was a sin I could pray away. I tried, God, I tried. But it wasn't until I left, until I came to New York, that I realized I wasn't broken. I was just me." Weston stared at him, the weight of Elliot's words sinking in. He'd never asked about Elliot's life, never dared to cross that line. But now the younger man's story unfolded like a map to a place Weston had never dared to go. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How did you survive it?" Elliot smiled, a small, bittersweet curve of his lips. "I found people who saw me for who I am. Friends, chosen family. They gave me the courage to stop hiding. But it's not easy, Weston. It's a fight every day, especially when the world wants you to be someone else." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You're not alone in this. You don't have to be." The words cracked something open in Weston's chest, a flood of longing and fear he'd suppressed for years. He thought of his own childhood in Seattle, the expectations of his tech genius father, the pressure to be perfect, to be straight, to be the son who carried the family name. Coming out had never been an option, not when he was 16 and sneaking glances at his best friend, not when he was 20 and building his first startup, and not now, at 26, with the world watching his every move. But Elliot was different. He wasn't just a driver. He was a spark, a challenge, a mirror reflecting the life Weston had never let himself imagine. "What if I can't do it?" Weston asked, his voice raw. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Elliot's hand found his again, this time gripping it firmly. "You are," he said. "I see it in you. You built an empire from nothing. You're stronger than you know." The room felt smaller, the city lights fading as the space between them shrank. Weston's pulse raced as Elliot's thumb brushed over his knuckles, a gesture so intimate it stole his breath. He wanted to lean in, to close the distance, but fear clawed at him, a lifetime of hiding, of playing the part. "Elliot," he whispered, "this could ruin me." "Maybe," Elliot said, his voice gentle but unflinching. "Or maybe it could save you." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Weston's eyes traced the lines of Elliot's face, the sharp curve of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes, and for the first time, he let himself imagine a world where he didn't have to hide. A world where he could be free. Before he could stop himself, Weston leaned forward, his lips brushing Elliot's in a kiss that was tentative at first, then desperate, like a man gasping for air after years underwater. Elliot kissed him back, his hands sliding to Weston's waist, pulling him closer. The world outside, the city, the company, the expectations, fell away, and for one fleeting moment, Weston was just a man, falling for another man, with no walls between them. But the moment shattered with the buzz of Weston's phone, a harsh reminder of the life he couldn't escape. He pulled back, his breath uneven, and glanced at the screen. Lila Carter, PR manager. Reality crashed in, cold and unyielding. I have to take this, he said, his voice hoarse. Elliot nodded, his expression unreadable, but his hand lingered on Weston's arm for a moment longer before letting go. Weston's hand shook as he answered the call, Lila's voice cutting through the haze of the moment. Weston, we have a problem, she said, her tone clipped, professional, but laced with urgency. Photos from the gala are circulating online, and there's one of you looking well. Let's just say it's not the image we want for Coltech as CEO. His stomach churned. What do you mean? He asked, though he already knew. He'd been careless, letting his guard down, letting his eyes linger on Elliot too long. Lila sighed. It's you and your driver. The way you're looking at him, it's raising eyebrows. We need to control the narrative before it spirals. I've scheduled a meeting with the board tomorrow morning. Weston's eyes flicked to Elliot, who stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the city lights. The kiss still burned on his lips, a reckless act that felt like freedom and ruin all at once. I'll handle it, he said to Lila, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. He ended the call and set the phone down, his hands clenching into fists. They saw us, he said, his voice low. At the gala. Someone took a photo. Elliot turned, his expression calm but resolute. What are they saying? He asked. Weston hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. They're saying I looked at you like I wanted you. The words felt like a confession, raw and exposing. Elliot's lips curved into a small, defiant smile. And did you? He asked, his voice soft but challenging. Weston's breath hitched. He wanted to deny it, to retreat to the safety of his lies, but the truth was a tide he couldn't hold back. Yes, he admitted, the word a release, a surrender. I've wanted you since the first day you drove me. Elliot's smile faded, replaced by something deeper, more vulnerable. Then why are you fighting it? He asked. Why are you so afraid of who you are? The question pierced Weston's core. He sank onto the leather couch, his head in his hands. Because I've spent my whole life building this, he said, gesturing to the penthouse, the city, the empire. And if I let myself be me, it could all disappear. My father, my investors, the world, they expect someone I'm not. Elliot sat beside him, close enough that their knees brushed. And what do you want? He asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Weston looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the driver who'd upended his world, but a man who'd fought his own battles and come out stronger. I want to be free, he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I want to stop pretending. I want you. The admission hung between them, fragile and true, and Elliot's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. Then let's figure this out together, Elliot said. You don't have to face the world alone. Weston wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the hope in Elliot's voice, but the weight of his reality was crushing. The board meeting loomed, a gauntlet of judgment and expectation. What if they force me out? He asked. What if I lose everything? Elliot's grip tightened. You won't lose everything, he said. You'll have yourself, the real you. And you'll have me. The words were a lifeline, but Weston's fear was a shadow he couldn't shake. He stood, pacing the room, his mind racing. I need time, he said. I need to think. Elliot nodded, his expression a mix of understanding and resolve. I'll be here, he said, whenever you're ready. He stood to leave, but at the elevator, he paused, turning back. Weston, he said, his voice steady. You're worth more than your company. Don't forget that. The elevator doors closed, and Weston was alone again, the city lights mocking his indecision. The next morning, the boardroom was a battlefield. 12 executives sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces a mix of concern and calculation. Lila stood at the head, projecting a photo from the gala. Weston, his eyes locked on Elliot, a look of unguarded longing frozen in time. We need to address this, Lila said. The media's already spinning a story. We can't afford a scandal. Weston's throat tightened, but he forced his voice to stay calm. It's just a photo, he said. It doesn't mean anything. The lie tasted bitter, but the board nodded, appeased for now. Still, he felt their eyes on him, judging, weighing his worth. As the meeting dragged on, Weston's thoughts drifted to Elliot, to the kiss, the promise, the man who saw him for who he was. And for the first time, he wondered if the cost of hiding was greater than the cost of truth. The board meeting left Weston drained, his tie loosened as he leaned back in his office chair, staring at the city below. The photo had been contained, for now. But the whispers were already spreading, a low hum of speculation that threatened to unravel his carefully curated life. He should have felt relieved, but all he could think about was Elliot's words. "You're worth more than your company." His phone buzzed, a text from Elliot. "Meet me at the pier. 8 p.m. No pressure, just us." Weston's heart skipped. The pier was a public place, a risk, but the thought of seeing Elliot again pulled at him like a tide. He typed a quick reply, "I'll be there," and spent the rest of the day distracted, his mind replaying their kiss, the way Elliot's touch had felt like a key to a locked door. At dusk, Weston arrived at the Hudson River Pier, the air crisp with the scent of salt and autumn leaves. Elliot was already there, leaning against the railing, his black jacket catching the fading light. He turned as Weston approached, his smile warm but cautious. "You came," he said, his voice soft against the sound of lapping waves. Weston nodded, his hands in his pockets to hide their trembling. "I needed to see you," he admitted. They walked along the pier, the city skyline a glittering backdrop. For a moment, it was just them. No cameras, no board, no expectations. Elliot told him about his life in New York, how he'd moved here to escape his small-town past, how driving for Weston had been a job he took to pay the bills but had become something more. "I saw you on the news before I even met you," Elliot said, his eyes bright. "This genius kid who built a tech empire. I didn't expect you to be so human." Weston laughed, a rare, genuine sound. "Human's not a word people use for me," he said. "They call me brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. But human? That's new." Elliot stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're all of those things," he said. "But you're also kind, and scared, and trying so hard to be what everyone else wants." "I see it, Weston. I see you." The words hit harder than Weston expected, and he felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crumble. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice raw. "I've spent my whole life hiding. My dad, he'd disown me if he knew. The board, the investors, they'd turn on me. I'm not like you, Elliot. I'm not brave." Elliot's hand found his, their fingers brushing in the shadows. "You don't have to be brave alone," he said. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Weston's chest tightened, a mix of fear and hope. He wanted to believe Elliot, wanted to believe in a world where he could be himself, but the weight of his responsibilities loomed large. Their moment was interrupted by a flash, a camera, somewhere in the distance. Weston froze, his hand dropping from Elliot's. "We can't," he said, his voice panicked. "Not here." Elliot's face fell, but he nodded, stepping back. "I get it," he said, his voice quiet. "But you can't keep running forever, Weston." He turned and walked away, leaving Weston alone on the pier, the camera's flash burning in his mind. Back at his penthouse, Weston couldn't sleep. The photo from the gala was already circulating on gossip sites, paired with headlines like "Tech Tycoon's Secret Romance." His phone buzzed with messages from Lila, urging him to issue a statement, to deny everything. But as he stared at the city lights, he thought of Elliot, of his courage, his kindness, his belief in a life Weston had never dared to imagine. For the first time, he wondered if he could be that man, the one who chose himself over his empire. The next day, Weston called Elliot, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Not here. Somewhere private." Elliot agreed, and they met at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from the prying eyes of Manhattan. Over coffee, Weston poured out his fears, his hopes, his dreams of a life where he didn't have to hide. Elliot listened, his presence a quiet strength, and when Weston finished, he reached across the table, his hand covering Weston's. "You're enough," Elliot said. "Just as you are." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Weston felt in his bones. He squeezed Elliot's hand, a silent promise, and for the first time, he felt a spark of courage, a flicker of the man he could become. The cafe meeting marked a turning point, but the world outside was closing in. By morning, the photo from the pier had hit the internet, paired with the gala image, and the headlines were merciless. Weston Cole's double life exposed. Lila was in damage control mode, flooding Weston's inbox with strategies to spin the story, a fake girlfriend, a public apology, anything to save his image. But Weston was tired of running, tired of hiding. Elliot's words echoed in his mind. "You're enough." He met Elliot again that evening, this time at a small park in the West Village, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. "I can't keep doing this," Weston said, his voice raw. "The lies, the pretending, it's killing me." Elliot's eyes softened, and he reached for Weston's hand, uncaring of who might see. "Then stop," he said simply. "Be honest. Not for me, not for the world, for you." Weston's heart pounded, but for the first time, it wasn't just fear. It was resolve. "I want to," he said, "but I need to do it my way. I need to tell my story before they do." Elliot nodded, his grip steady. "I'll be right here," he said. "Whatever you decide." The next day, Weston called an emergency press conference, his palms sweaty as he stood at the podium in Khongbaogio's sleek headquarters. The room was packed, reporters, cameras, the board watching from the front row. Lila stood nearby, her face pale, but Weston had made his choice. He took a deep breath, the weight of a lifetime of secrets pressing against his chest. "I've spent my life building Khongbaogio," he began, his voice steady. "But I've also spent my life hiding who I am. I'm done with that. I'm gay, and I'm in love with someone who makes me want to be better, braver, truer." The room erupted in murmurs, cameras flashing, but Weston kept going. "I don't know what this means for my company, for my future, but I know I can't live a lie anymore. I hope you'll judge me for my work, not my personal life, but I'm ready to face whatever comes next." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a single clap broke through, followed by another, until the room was filled with applause. Not unanimous, but enough. Weston's eyes found Elliot in the back, his smile a beacon in the chaos. For the first time, Weston felt free, like the man he was always meant to be. But the fallout was swift. Some investors pulled out, citing instability. The board called an emergency meeting, hinting at a vote to replace him. Lila worked overtime to manage the PR storm, but Weston felt strangely calm. He'd told his truth, and no one could take that away. That night, he and Elliot sat on the penthouse balcony, the city sprawling beneath them. "Did I just destroy everything?" Weston asked, half joking. Elliot laughed, his hand finding Weston's. "You built something new," he said. "Something real." They kissed under the stars, the city lights a silent witness to their courage. But the peace was short-lived. The next morning, Weston's father called, his voice cold and final. "You've disgraced the family," he said. "You're no son of mine." The words cut deep, but Weston held his head high, knowing he'd chosen himself. As the days passed, Weston faced the consequences, a dip in stock prices, a fractured board, a media frenzy. But he also found unexpected allies, employees who admired his courage, investors who stayed loyal, and a growing community online who celebrated his truth. Elliot was by his side through it all, his quiet strength a reminder that love was worth fighting for. Weeks turned into months, and Weston's world reshaped itself around his truth. The board didn't oust him. Too many saw his honesty as a strength, a new kind of leadership. Khongbaogio's stock stabilized, buoyed by a wave of public support from younger consumers who valued authenticity. Weston's father never called again, but the loss, though painful, felt like shedding a weight he'd carried too long. He and Elliot grew closer, their relationship a quiet rebellion against a world that tried to define them. They moved in together, a cozy apartment in Brooklyn far from the penthouse's sterile perfection. Elliot quit driving, enrolling in art school to pursue his passion for painting, and Weston found himself inspired by his partner's fearlessness. They built a life together, not without challenges. Paparazzi still lingered, and not every investor was forgiving, but with a joy Weston had never known. One evening, as they sat on their balcony, the city alive with possibility, Weston turned to Elliot. "You changed everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made me believe I could be me." Elliot smiled, his eyes reflecting the lights of Brooklyn. "You did that yourself," he said. "I just reminded you who you were." Weston thought back to that night when Elliot had come back inside, the moment that had cracked his world open. It wasn't just about love, it was about courage, about choosing authenticity over fear, about building a life that mattered. He'd lost pieces of his old world, but what he'd gained was infinitely more: a partner, a purpose, a self he could finally embrace. As they held hands, the city stretching out before them, Weston realized that the breathless moment wasn't just the kiss, or the confession, or the press conference. It was every step he'd taken since, every choice to live his truth. He was no longer the untouchable CEO, the man hiding behind a mask. He was Weston Cole, flawed, human, and finally free. The world would keep turning, with its judgments and its challenges, but Weston wasn't alone anymore. With Elliot by his side, he could face anything. And as the stars blinked above, he knew that this messy, beautiful, authentic life was worth every risk.